just to reiterate, we've created a sample folder within Visual Studio. We've got our CSS called style.css in a CSS folder. We have an image for sprites, and we've kind of been touching on the how you can do some of these styling list style changes. All right, let's go ahead and pull up again our PowerPoint. These are the list styles images that we were talking about. You can also set the position for these, and you can set it either inside or outside, and it does exactly what I'm describing here. It'll set the location of that. All right, let's scroll on down real quick and talk about margins and padding. Now, inside your Chrome window, actually, let's do this real quick. Let's go back into Visual Studio Code, and we're going to create a div. And I'm going to wrap that div around the bottom. We'll reformat this. And I'm going to call this class my box, because I'm uncreative right now. Can't think of a better name. And we'll come over here and address my box, and we're just going to give it an outline to demonstrate some of the ideas behind padding and margins. Okay, so we're going to say this has a border of 1px. It's going to be solid, and it's going to be black. I'll save that, come over and refresh, and you'll see there's now this box that's there. Now, when we're talking about margins and padding, margins and padding have to do with the space of an element. Okay, margins are dealing with the space outside the element, on the outside of it, and padding has to do with the spacing on the inside. Let's see, there used to be a nice tool in here to actually, there it is. Can you guys see this demo box here inside of the window? This gives you an idea of the margin, the border, and the padding. So right now, if I select this area here, the margin is the outside of the border line. Okay, there's the border. As I hover over it, you can see it kind of blink on and off. And then the padding is on the inside of it. So if we go to look at our code and we specify and say margin with one number, that one number is going to give us a margin on the top, the left, the right, and the bottom. And if I refresh it, come over here again and do this, you can see that it's actually expanded that margin. And we can see that margin listed here in this little box window inside of Chrome. Ideally, you can actually make the margin even bigger depending on what your purposes are. So if you want the outside of that box more spacing around it, that gives you the ability to get that extra spacing. And you can see that spacing now has appeared there. At the same time, if you want the inside of the box to have padding, you would use the padding style indicator. And for this one, I'm just going to say 25px. We'll save that and refresh it, and you can see that the padding on the inside now has increased, as well as our little diagram over here shows it. Now, margin and padding, you can do as well. You can specify the margin to be only on one side. You could say margin is top, bottom, left, or right. And so if I say margin top, I want it to be 25 pixels. I could come over here and say margin left, 10 pixels, right? Margin Bottom, 15 pixels. It's up to you on what that would be. And of course, those changes then will be reflected. You can see then that the margin is actually carried across on those pieces. At the same time, there is a shorthand for specifying margins. You can use the spacing, so I think it's like 15 px, and then not comma, 25 and now we're specifying each of those sides. And if we take a look at it and refresh it, we can see that the top is 25, the left is 10, the bottom is 15, and we've specified a right as well. So we got 15, 25, 15. Let's make it a little bit more unique here. Let's make this 30. We'll save that and refresh it so you can see. Yeah. So now you got 15 is the top, 10 is the left, 25 is the right, and 30 is the bottom. And it's all based on the orientation of how you put this. The same is true for your padding. Your padding you can specify left, you can specify right. There's a lot of different things you could do there. All right, any questions with your margins and your paddings? It's good to note that a lot of your browsers, they implement the margins on different elements. And I believe it's mostly your text inputs. They implement the margin differently. And so a common way to deal with those margins is to tell at the very top of your code to specify and say, I want everything, wildcard, okay, to have a specified margin. And actually, I think this is box sizing of 0. I believe it's box sizing is the property you use. And that will force everything by default so that all browsers, whether you're using Chrome, Safari, Firefox, iOS on your phone, or on Android, I think it's like Android Web Toolkit. There are a lot of different browser implementations, but they all don't interpret HTML and CSS the same way, especially when it comes to margins. So it's a good idea to put this at the top. Okay, any questions? You guys bored out of your mind? No? All right. Let's go back to our slides real quick and go through the rest of these. All right, again, this is your margin, your padding. I highly recommend use your developer tools, okay, to take a look at what those are when you're looking at elements. Okay. Yep. All right, pseudo classes. The best way to think about pseudo classes is think about a class as something that does an action and an element as something that exists. Okay? So let's do an example here. Let's say on my li, I'm going to have a pseudo class. And this pseudo class is going to be hover. Now, y'all know what hover means, right? Hover means like when you hover, like being a helicopter dad, right, or a helicopter parent. You're hovering over it, all right? So one of the common things you might want to do with a pseudo class is actually change the color of something, or cause it to grow or bounce or do some different types of variation to give your website a little different look and feel. And you do that, you specify the action that the user is performing with a pseudo class. So you're telling the browser, listen for this action on this element and do something. So I'm going to make it brown. So if we go back in, we look at our code here, And when we hover, you can see now that the hover is actually, it's using that pseudo class to do something, right? There are a bunch of pseudo classes, and we're fortunate enough with Visual Studio Code that they list them for you. All right, now here it's giving you some pseudo elements as well, but typically checked, let's see, there you go, there's hover. I think this is giving you a lot more. It's not specifying the actual pseudo classes. It's giving you some pseudo elements. Let's pull up CSS. If you go on the CSS, just click on W3 Schools, go to CSS, and then scroll to the bottom. It's all alphabetized. You'll see the pseudo classes. Here they are. And there's a large list of pseudo classes down here on this site that you can use to validate, right? So you got active, checked, disabled, empty, right? These are all pseudo classes that if an input has focus, so for example, if you're creating an input on a page, let's do this. Put text, and I'm going to give it a class of my name. Okay. Copy it. Do it again. Because I'm being lazy here, I'm just going to put a break line. And normally when you click on like an input, you don't really see a lot. You see the standard highlighting that occurs, but let's say that we want there to be something more obvious about what's happening with that class. Well, we could just say, call the class name itself. It was my name, wasn't it? And we'll say on focus, we want the background color to be aqua, or it could be any of the RGB colors or the H, if you're with the property, what was the other property for colors? HSF, or what was it? You remember? You guys, you looked at it, right? HSL. Yeah, HSL. All right, so we modified that. Then when we click on it, on focus, it's changing that for us, right? So there's different times where we want those pseudo classes to take effect. I highly recommend taking a look either on the CSS W3 School site. Learn these, keep these on reference for yourself, especially after class. You can be able to come back and use these for making your sites, that much more interactive. Yet you also have some cool things in here, like you have an in range, which means that once there's a certain number that's been typed, it's going to do something. It's going to call for the action of whatever you want it to be. You have the language. So for example, you could specify if it's Chinese or Korean or whatever, and you could specify a particular style to be based on those. The last child, the last of type. The common that you guys are probably all used to is the link, right? So when we're using links, we'll say we use an anchor tag, right? And that anchor tag, I'm just going to populate with a £sign for right now, but we'll call this home. And when we're looking at it, there it is. But let's say I want to specify that all of my anchor tags use a pseudo class of hover. And on hover, I want it to be, let's see, font size large for some reason, right? So when you refresh it, it's going to actually change the size of it for you. Yeah, so those are your pseudo classes. Any questions so far on pseudo classes? Okay. It's, as I said, it's a very good idea to learn these, to bookmark these references. When you're done with this CSS222 web development class, you may not have access to the Cengage material. So it's a good idea to kind of bookmark, learn where the other resources are at. Mozilla has a great set of resources online for all of the CSS and the standards and so forth. So make sure you're bookmarking those. All right, let's go ahead and move forward here. So those are our pseudo classes. The textbook is talking about, of course, now your pseudo elements. Pseudo elements are the actual elements themselves. And sometimes a pseudo element will be the first line or first word or the first child in a set of items. The set could be a list, or it might be a set of paragraphs, or a set of H2 tags, right? You could have any number of things that these are referring to. A very common one that's used as well is the first letter. Sometimes they'll want to take the first letter of a paragraph and they want to make it large. Well, you could do that with a pseudo element without actually having to change things within the index, within the HTML itself. Okay, any questions so far, guys? You guys are good? All right, let's move on forward here. Pseudo classes for hypertext, we've talked about those. Link, visited, right? Active, hover, focus. Your pseudo elements. First letter. Now, you'll probably notice here that the pseudo elements, they use the double colon tag. That's kind of important. So if we're looking at, say, our text over here, let's do something. Let's go back, and I need fake HTML filler text. Let's see, where is it at? Ipsum dollar. All right, a lot of sites, when they're demoing a page, they're setting it up, they need text to fill it up with, and they'll use what's called the Ipsum dollar. It's a set of Latin script that simulates spacing and so forth. It kind of becomes useful when you're creating a website. You don't have the content for it right away, but you want to get things to lay out properly. There's a lot of Ipsum dollar sites that you can go to grab dummy text. So I'm going to come over here, create a paragraph, and I'm just going to paste in some of that text. Go back to our site just to validate it real quick. All right, I've got it right there. So what I want to do is I want the first letter in that paragraph to be affected, right? So how do I do that? Well, I would come down here and I would specify paragraph, double colon, first letter, and I'll say font size, and I'm going to specify kind of a large font. I'll say 24 pixels. Come back out, refresh it, and now I've only specified it's only affecting that first letter. It kind of gives you that cool look, right? We could actually make it a lot bigger. And there you go, right? a lot of the pseudo classes, it's very helpful in that way. There's also things where you can do where you can change the text before it or after it, and you could do this by saying before or after. So if we go in and we say paragraph before, and we could specify, let's see, let's look up an example. We'll grab an example over here using the before. First line. Yeah, that's what I was looking for, the content. So I'll need to use my image because I don't have one. Or we could, let's just see if it, I don't think it'll recognize it. No. Save the image. Where are we going to? Cancel. You're going to make it hard for me, aren't you? You know what? Let's just use their URL, because this is a valid example as well. All right, so we're just going to paste in their URL to that smiley. Then we'll come back to our page. I don't recommend doing that all the time. You want to make sure you have access to your own images and not be linking off of someone else, because if you're linking off their image and they decide, well, we're going to change the image, then you're kind of screwed, aren't you? You can't do it anymore. But just to demonstrate the idea here, what we're showing, that on the P before I can put specified content, and I can actually do that. Or if I wanted to, I could actually do this as well. I can make it text, and if I make it text, it's actually pasted in the actual text instead. I'm affecting the document that's rendered with text that I've told it to be there. Hi, I am messing with your page, right? And that will actually be in there now. And you can tell the other cool thing that's happening, because the style first letter is being changed, it's interpreting it and making that now the new uppercase letter. You see that? Okay, any questions? All right, let's keep moving. All right, so those are your pseudo classes. We're talking about generating content within your page. I've actually used this for the company I work for right now. We have a static web page that came in, and a static application that came in. It's a website used by the college at Indiana State. And they wanted to specify in the About section what environment and what server it was on. And the way I did this was actually, instead of rewriting their code, because their code was wrapped up and deployed in these jar files, these WAR files, we used the CSS to actually tell it, hey, specify this information by using the content tag like you see here. Just using that tag, I could specify and put in the information I want onto the page. Okay, so you have your content before, you have it after. You can set the content empty. You can actually use counters. Using counters are actually kind of cool. With the counter, the way you would do it is, let's say on our index HTML over here, that instead of using a UI, UL, an unordered. Maybe I want to do a set of give a list of things and I want to style it. So I've got these restaurants, and I'm just going to type in some restaurants real quick here. You guys give me some restaurants you eat at. Cupbap?
Yeah.
I probably pronounced that wrong, don't I? What's another one? All right, by raised hand, how many of you eat at McDonald's more than twice a week? Oh, I'm proud of you all. All right, so the idea behind this is, with the counter, is you want to change the layout, right? So I got up here, I've got these restaurants. I want some type of counter to be set on it. So the way I would do that is I'd go into my CSS, and I'm going to say H1 counter reset, and what is it? 0, and then H2. Oh, hang on. Content I remember. You got to give it a name, I believe. You have to specify a name. All right, so H2, and then you use counter, increment, and the section. Let's see if I did it right. Oh, you guys are seeing me mess up. All right, let's look at the reference for counter. So you have counter reset, creates the reset counter. Counter increment increments the counter. And content inserts the generator. Okay. Counter reset. Okay, we got section. Let's go back and change it. I don't think it needs quotes. These become variable names, okay? The variable name, so H2 before, yep. Got to specify the location. And then we'll use our content, and we'll just say counter variable name. I think that did it. So we refresh it. Now we have that, right? It put that information. We could add a little bit more and do things like that. Add dashes, right? So counters are kind of a cool way, and you can actually set up counters with subsections. You can do a lot of cool things with that. Okay. Any questions about counters? Again, the idea behind the counter is it gives you a mechanism to create a list on items that isn't necessarily a UL, LI, or OL, LI set of elements. You can make other things have numbers on them. Okay. All right. For your URLs, you can display anything like images, videos, etc. All of that using the URL. If you have like a video on YouTube that you want to appear in the background of something, you can actually specify the beginning and ending time and put it on a loop and have it play behind your site to kind of give a bit of animation and do some cool things. Let's keep going. All right, so we have inserting quotation marks. This is using the block quote and the Q element. Basically, the idea is behind this of putting a decorative section on a block of HTML on your page. Okay, so the idea here with your block quote, so you have a block quote element. As you can see here, this is in your CSS, these are standard elements. Okay, and we're just saying that the color, the margin, and the quote symbols, these are going to be the quote symbols that are used. And these quote symbols are actually, I believe they're tilde marks on the page. You can specify where it happens, okay, and so forth. All right, validating your style sheet. Now, I think we're right at the end of this one. Yeah. When you're validating your style sheet, there are a number of validators that are out there, but honestly, your biggest help is going to be right here within the console. If you have something that doesn't make sense, your console is going to pick it up and it's going to tell you about it, right? So, like, say for example, the mistake I made here with the images by not having that relative reference. If I take that back out, if I save that and take that back out and refresh, you can see that it's validating it and it's telling me, hey, you know what? We can't find this. This doesn't make sense. This file you're looking for, we can't find it. It'll also catch other mistakes that you make. Like, for example, say that you call this section 1 and your counter is referencing a different variable. Come on, catch it. I don't know why it's not catching it. All right. For whatever reason, it doesn't catch that particular issue. But let's take a look at. Let's go back over here. There are a number of validators that I've used before, and basically with the validator you can tell it to look at your syntax and expose any errors on your CSS. This site is the jigsaww3.org. The w3.org sites, W3 these are the guys who actually approve what goes into the syntax for CSS, for HTML, and also JavaScript. So you would specify your CSS file that you're trying to validate, or you could upload it. So I'll just come over here and go to my site, load the CSS, and tell it to check it. And of course it's telling me it found an error, box sizing, right? So it'll give you all of the information that's necessary to validate. Again, this site is W3, it's jigsaw.w3.org, CSS validator, and the endpoint is actually validator. And what I'll do is I'll copy that and send that to you all in your email. Okay, any questions at this point? Yes?
So if we're making changes to the styles, does it have to be like the order of the HTML?
What do you mean?
If we're going to make changes to the footer, would that be last? Or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter, but here's the rule with your CSS. The specificity of your CSS, the strongest specificity will win, right? So when you think about strong specificity, up here, this is very loose, right? This is saying everything is going to have this style. It's not very specific. So I can actually come down here in my H1 and set a background color. And I'll just make it that since it's at the top. And because this is more specific than body, H1 will actually take on this color. So if you take a look at it, you'll see it takes on that color. So it's a matter of specificity. Blah, blah, blah. I speak English very well, I promise you. Okay, it's how specific it is. Specificity is the actual term they use, but if both of your items are very specific in their reference, then the one that wins the style is the last out, the last statement. So you got to think about it in terms of, in your CSS, you're reading down from top to bottom. And at the very bottom, if you place something that's more specific or it has the same level of specificity as an item up at the top of the page, that last interpreted value is the one that'll be accepted. This is why CSS is called cascading. Okay, the styles cascade down until there's something that's more specific to override it. Okay, good question. Good question. Anybody else? Okay, we forgot to do something in our CSS document. Can anyone tell me what we forgot to put in here? Yes.
List the character sets.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for. So we're going to do at, what is it? Char set and UTF, right? Now, the correct way to do it is in double quotes. And if you don't put double quotes, it won't recognize it. Visual Studio Code is actually validating this for you as you go. And so it's catching it, right? This statement here has to be at the top. Anything below it, it's going to ignore it. And you can't have anything above this statement. All right, so why did our code work earlier without the UTF char set? Why did it work? Well, the reason it worked earlier was actually my metadata here was actually specifying it. And the default UTF char, the default char set is UTF on a document if it's not specified. So you want to put the UTF character set in the document because it's very important, especially if you're developing your site in another language. Okay. Does anyone know what UTF stands for? It's not a stock ticker. Here you go. UTF it's a Unicode, but it actually stands for Unicode Transformation Format 8. Okay. And this is capable of encoding all of those valid characters. Okay. Unicode Transformation Code 8. So for example, if you're using Korean or Chinese, right, Unicode is supposed to catch all of those. Now you can use wider Unicode character sets. I think there's Unicode 16, 32, and so forth. But, all right. The other item we didn't talk about, and you guys should have discussed this yeah. The other item we didn't talk about, but hopefully you did discuss, was the import statement. Does anyone know what the import statement is for? Okay. So what do you think import will do? Anybody know? Import actually just imports another CSS file. The idea behind it is, let's say that your website, I'm going to try to stand up here and see how long this lavalier mic will last. The idea is that your website that for the company you're working for could be rather large. You could have 20, 30, 40 pages. You may have pages that are dynamically generated, right, based on data that's received from a database. And all of that data comes to the front end. And so each page may have to have specialized CSS. But you may find that all of the pages have a unified theme, a unified style. And so you don't want to create this giant CSS for all of these pages, but you want your HTML to import them appropriately. There's a couple of ways you could handle it. You could put all of your CSS links on in your index HTML. You could have a link to standard styles, right? You could have all of these in there. You could have your bootstrap style sheets in there. You could have it all. But what they've done is they've created this mechanism so that when you're working on a particular CSS page and you want to import like base styles, you could create it in another style sheet and then just import it in here, so that your index HTML doesn't have to have multiple CSS entries up there. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Let's talk about your homework assignments this last week. How many of you have been able to complete the assignments from last week? Let's see. We had 3 assignments on week 1, right? We had the install VS Code and create your first web page. 17 of 19 people turned that in. That means 2 of you are sheepishly quiet right now, right? Come see me if you have not turned in your assignment for this, because this just validates that you have your VS Code installed, okay? Make sure you get that done. On this one of you didn't complete this one. This is installing Git and creating your GitHub account, okay? So if you did not get that one done, make sure you come see me so we can get that one resolved. Everyone got setting up your first web hosting account. Okay, so those are the 3 from week 1. Week 2, we had, is that week 2? Okay, we had this one, adding the SFTP extension to your site. And 2 of you also need to turn in that one. Okay. And then we're into week 3. Week 3 was just one assignment with the, where is it at? Did I miss it? Oh, this is it right here. Okay. So this assignment here actually creates a bit of a conflict. If you've turned in the previous week, it says it'll upload to the website, right? Triple web hosting. And then this week, in week 3, it says also it'll upload to the web hosting. So the conflict it creates is if you create your home page as index.html, it's going to overwrite it, right? So for this assignment, change the index.html to home.html or something else that designates the name of your site. And then when you upload it, you're going to have, for example, like here's my site, right? There's the site there, but you can also, you'll type in the name of the page just like that. And you'll give me that link. Okay? You guys understand? So you got this backslash and then the name of the HTML file. Use that for week 3. All right. Any questions? Yes, sir.
When are all the quizzes due?
The quizzes are supposed to be done each week. Are you needing to make up some quizzes?
Yeah.
Okay. Come see me here in a minute and we'll talk about those. Make sure they're up to date. All right. We're done a little bit early today. I'm going to kind of stop the recording now and kind of leave this as open time. If you need to work on your assignments, please do. If you get stuck on something, I'll try to come around and help you. Otherwise, if you need to go ahead and head out for the day, feel free to do that as well. Okay? All right.